Hey everybody, today I want to talk about form meeting function. It's a term that I've thrown out a whole bunch, but I haven't really sort of explained in its totality, and perhaps even today it won't be totally explained, but hopefully a little clearer at the very least as to what form meeting function is. So when we think about writing, oftentimes we think about sort of expressing ourselves through the use of language. And that's really a good way to think about it, right? That writing uses words, obviously. And so oftentimes when we're thinking about how we're expressing ourselves, right, we worry very much about the word choice. And then, of course, comes in grammar. And then, of course, comes in sort of traditional structures. So, for example, if you're writing a story, right, we have paragraphs, we have sentences, we have indentations, we have beginning, middles, and ends, right? And we have all these things, these rules that help structure how we're writing and what we're thinking about and how we put it on the page. But another sort of level up on top of the idea of traditional structures and how we think of writing is the literal forms that we use. So for poetry especially, this is true, and I think we're going to focus on poetry here just because it makes the most sense, though it does apply to fiction, and perhaps we'll bring in more examples of that as well. But let's talk about poetry for a minute. That's sort of the best way to think of forms because they can be so concise that oftentimes we think of formal poetry as what we did in school or what we were forced to do by teachers, right? And that's really not the best way to think of forms. Oftentimes, many poets have pointed this out in the past, right? We start with formal poetry because it's good to mimic people, it's good to take something from the past, try it, get better, improve, and then eventually you get to drop the forms and you get to move on to quote unquote free verse. That's how it was often portrayed to me, right? You start with the rules and the basics, and once you learn the rules and the basics, then you can start breaking the rules, right? Until you really understand the rules, you can't break them because it has to be conscious effort. But here, what we want to talk about is how forms can also be quite helpful, and why we learn forms is not only to sort of get us into poetry in the first place, but how they can be used in life as a technique in and of themselves, and they are excellent because they are formal in that nature. So what I mean by that is oftentimes we think of, for example, a Shakespearean sonnet as iambic pentameter, as 14 lines, as the rhyme scheme, right? And that sort of dampers how we feel about it, or that sort of creates a taste in our mouth of like what we did in 10th grade, and it was really hard to count, the meter of it all, and it was really annoying to get the rhyme right, and, slant rhymes and all, right? It's just technical, and it feels very limiting. But really, you want to think of Shakespearean sonnet as a way to deal with obsession. And what I mean by that is because of the rhyme scheme, because of the coda at the end, right? The two rhyming lines at the end that shape and develop the poem, and is where the conclusion of the poem wraps up, right? It serves as a book end to the poem. We want to think of those two lines as the definition of obsession, right? That's where we are obsessed. And so when you're thinking of why would I use a Shakespearean sonnet in my everyday poetry, really what you're asking is, what am I obsessed about, right? How do I use the couplet and the rhyme scheme as this idea of obsession, right? Rhyming automatically creates obsession. At the very least, it's obsession with sound, right? But it can also be used as obsession over an item. How do I use the form itself to meet the function that I'm trying to create, the experience I'm trying to create? And so when I talk about form meeting function, it's how do I use the rules within this poem, grammar, rhyme scheme, line length, whatever the rule is, how do I use it to best enact the experience that I'm having or that I want the reader to have? And so when we talk about form meeting function, we really want to think about how can we really enact everything that we want to accomplish through the experience of reading. The prompt for this could be pick an item that you're obsessed about and write a sonnet. That's the very simple way of doing it. Let's think about fiction and its iteration of obsession and form, right? So we know of the paragraph. But oftentimes the paragraph is used as a way to think of one thing that happens in a story, or even an article, right? One idea, right? We think of one paragraph, one idea, one sentence, one idea, one paragraph, one bigger idea, one paper, one idea, right? And we define paragraphs as ideas. And so oftentimes what you'll see is people using the paragraph as the way to think of an idea. And what we can do with that is use the paragraph to build one idea, one thing that happened in the story. So every paragraph can only have one action, for example. That's a way to think of form meaning function. Which action is happening in this paragraph, and I can only focus on that action. And that can really change the way you think. Because oftentimes in paragraph, people are going from the store, in their car, to their house, and then they meet their kids, right? And that's all one paragraph. And to a degree, that is one idea. But really, I want you to think about one action within a paragraph and only can focus on that as the story. And so hopefully those prompts generate new ideas and you get to focus on the writing itself and you sort of inhabit the form meaning function. And in a future video, we're going to dissect a poem and a story, hopefully, about, maybe not in the same video if it's too long, but show how form meanings function within these works so that you get a more tangible example. So thanks for checking out the lesson. Hopefully these prompts get you somewhere today with your writing, and I'd love to see them below or submit to the journal. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, please rate, share, like, subscribe, do all those things. And we have a Patreon if you're interested in supporting what we do here at the journal. We really appreciate that. Hopefully we'll see you next time.